Good morning, everyone from California. Good afternoon or a very good evening to all those joining us from around the globe. My name is Marty Kusing, and I get the pleasure of introducing our very first speaker this evening or morning, wherever you come from. Dr. Jeffrey Croteau is a Masonic researcher and author and serves as the librarian of the Scottish Rite Museum and Library. He operates as the director of the library and archives and is responsible for acquiring books and periodicals, cataloging books, and providing reference services. He also frequently writes about the library's collection for the museum blog and the Northern Light magazine. His contribution to this book is Joseph Cerneau and v. Emanuel De La Motta, Understanding the Founding of the Scottish Rite's Northern Masonic Jurisdiction 1813 through the Lens of Religious Intolerance. A little teaser for this contribution focuses on the conflict between Cerneau's Supreme Council and that of the Southern and Northern Masonic jurisdictions' Supreme Councils. In all the previous investigations into this topic, the subject of religion has largely been left out, drawing on the multiple primary sources, including an unpublished 1874 manuscript. The case is presented, which suggests that perhaps the decades-long fight against Cerneauism by the United States' first two Supreme Councils can trace its roots to Cerneau's group's exclusionary practices and intolerance towards Jewish Freemasons and a potential mutual misunderstanding of the nature of the two similar yet distinct Masonic rites propagated by Cerneau's organization and the Southern and Northern Masonic jurisdictions. If you would please join me in virtually welcoming Dr. Jeff Croteau.
Thank you very much. And while I appreciate being called doctor, I am not a doctor, but I appreciate that very wonderful introduction. So, as you may know, the Scottish Rite Masonic Museum and Library, for which I am the Director of Library and Archives, was founded and is funded by the Scottish Rite Masons of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction. And because of that, our collection, of course, has deep resources related to the founding of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, and it's a subject that I am particularly interested in. And anyone who is familiar with the story of the founding of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction knows that it is definitely not a straightforward story. My essay looks at the conflict between Joseph Cerneau, who was a Roman Catholic born in France, who immigrated to New York City, and Emanuel De La Motta, who was born on the island of Saint Croix and was a member of Charleston's Jewish community, as well as a member of the first Supreme Council in the world, today's Southern jurisdiction. And I look in this essay at how their lives come together in 1813 in New York City. So if I could have the next slide, please. Great. So De La Motta in New York City in 1813 was investigating the various groups at the time, and there were a number of them who were conferring the so-called high degrees, and none of these groups were subordinate to De La Motta's Supreme Council in Charleston, which was the only Supreme Council in the United States at that point. In addition to single-handedly creating the Northern Masonic Jurisdiction Supreme Council in 1813, De La Motta also published a circular against Cerneau, which is pictured here. And this is from our collection, and our museum's digital collections website has a fully digitized version of this if you want to take a look at it. And De La Motta declared Cerneau, quote, an impostor of the first magnitude, and expelled him from every Masonic asylum within our jurisdiction. Now, what I've wondered about over the years, and what no researcher had yet investigated, is the potential role of religious prejudice in these events. So official histories of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction and the Southern jurisdiction have highlighted the civil and Masonic political rivalries, while also making the case that Cerneau lacked the proper Masonic authority to his title and degrees. but no one had yet written about the potential role of religious intolerance. So I decided to take a closer look at this. Because Stephen Moran's Rite of Perfection, also known as the Order of the Royal Secret, which of course was the precursor to the modern day Scottish Rite, included so many Jewish Masons as deputy inspectors general, and because the Southern and Northern Masonic jurisdiction Supreme Council included officers who were Jewish, it struck me that perhaps one thing that differentiated Cerneau's group was that it did not include Jews, and that in fact, perhaps it purposefully excluded them. So after De La Motta published his circular, declaring Cerneau an impostor of the first magnitude, Cerneau's organization, no surprise, responded to this and published as a committee a rejoinder. And in that rejoinder, they included some questions that appear to ask whether De La Motta could possess the degrees that he claims to. Now, De La Motta, reading between the lines, asks in a published response to Cerneau whether Cerneau intends to disparage De La Motta because he is Jewish. So personally, I think it's possible, even likely, that Cerneau did intend this. That I tend to agree with De La Motta's conclusion, but the Cerneau pamphlet is written in such a way that one could conclude that Cerneau means something else. And in the way that it's written, you could say that it even gives him plausible deniability. And what Cerneau's committee wrote in part was, quote, "It is only necessary to remark that those who have any knowledge of our degrees, of De La Motta, and of some of the persons he names, must allow that it is utterly impossible that they ought to be what they profess," unquote. So De La Motta writes very plainly that he believes that Cerneau is insinuating that his Jewish faith disallows him from certain degrees in Freemasonry. And I'd like to read you an extended quote from De La Motta's forceful response, because I feel like it gives a real flavor for De La Motta's style and how vehemently he was pushing back against Cerneau. So he writes in this in part in this pamphlet, quote, "Does it not excite the indignation of every enlightened Mason on a cursory perusal of the above paragraph? Can the gentleman composing this committee of Mr. Cerneau's association," and I should point out, he keeps calling him Mr. Cerneau, not brother, "mean to impeach my character, or that of the gentleman alluded to? They dare not. Or is it in consequence of our being Israelites, that is, Jews? If so, it is another strong corroborative proof, not only of their total want of information of the sublime degrees, but in fact of the whole system of Masonry. What are the first principles requisite to qualify a candidate for admission in the first degree? Is it not a belief in the existence of a supreme being? Does not a Hebrew, meaning a Jew, manifest such faith? Is not anything whatever relative to religion and politics prohibited in our lodges? Does it require more than that a man should possess that belief and enjoy a good moral character to entitle him to the benefit of Masonry? Is there a path where the foot of civilized man has traversed, the Masonic institutions are not established, and its benefits extended to all the believers in a supreme deity without its being confined to any particular sect? Let us take a view of the first three degrees. Is it not evident to every symbolic Mason that there are no distinctions as to religious or political principles? It is as evident to the Royal Arch Mason that a Hebrew has the same privilege extended to him as a companion of any other persuasion. If then the principles of Masonry are predicated upon such grounds, it is presumable that the more sublime degrees should shut its doors against the admission of any person of morality, virtue, and religion. Admitting for a moment that Mr. Cerneau and his society should be in the possession of the high degrees, I call upon them to produce, if they can, one single instance in any one degree of Masonry which disenfranchises a Hebrew from enjoying every privilege granted to any other sect. Were I at liberty fully to explain myself, by which he means discussing ritual in a published pamphlet, it being impossible to say into whose hands this may fall, I would lead them through each degree, particularly the Rose Croix and the Royal Secret, and point out whether a Hebrew is not as much entitled as a Christian brother or any other of whatever persuasion to the Royal Arch, the Perfection, Chief of the Tabernacle, the Prince of Mercy, the Knight of the Brazen Serpent, and many more, both under and above. End quote. And thank you for your patience in that long quote. I do really feel like it captures the forcefulness with which De La Motta does respond, and there's more of this in the pamphlet. So while it is clear that De La Motta thinks that Cerneau is disparaging him because he is Jewish, it is not 100% clear what Cerneau intended. And if I could have the next slide, please. And then while I was in the course of my work, I came across this 1823 document in our collection that was published by Cerneau's group. And in this document, rather than using some subtler forms of anti-Semitism and religious intolerance that Cerneau may have been using previously, he proclaimed that members of the Southern jurisdiction and Northern Masonic jurisdiction's rites consisted of members who, quote, are unworthy of possessing the sublime degrees of philosophic Masonry, which is founded on the Christian religion, to which they are enemies in principles. So just to underscore that last part, he is claiming, or his group is claiming, both that the sublime degrees are founded on the Christian religion, and that non-Christians, meaning Jews in this context, are enemies in principles. Strong words. So back in 2015, I wrote to Brent Morris, who will be presenting this morning, knowing that he also had done a lot of research related to this time period. And I asked him whether he was familiar with anyone approaching this topic of Cerneauism from the point of view of religion. And he said no. And he was very encouraging for me to pursue it, which I did. And he also helpfully noted that in 1814, so a year after a lot of the events I'm focusing on, Cerneau's Sovereign Grand Consistory established the Grand Encampment of Knights Templar and Appendant Orders for the state of New York, which is an organization that was restricted to Christian members. So in my essay, what I do is I explore the idea, I explore a few different ideas, and one of them is that De La Motta misunderstood which rite Cerneau was practicing. So De La Motta clearly believed that it was the same rite that the Charleston Supreme Council was practicing. And I look at some more primary source evidence in my essay that suggests a long-standing Christians-only approach within Cerneau's rite. So early on in the Cerneau, in what we have of existing Cerneau material up through the 1820s, the overt anti-Semitism is not there. When you start looking at later this Cerneau material, the groups that claim Cerneau heritage, it becomes very clear, and I get into that in my essay. And it appears, as I was saying, that the animosity between De La Motta and Cerneau arose in large part at the beginning from the fact that they were practicing two similar but different rites. So Cerneau's Masonic rite was known as the ancient constitutional Scottish Rite of Herodom, which was probably restricted to Christians, and De La Motta's ancient and accepted rite, which of course is today's Scottish Rite, or ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, or ancient accepted rite, depending on where you are in the world, was open to non-Christians from its beginning in 1801. And so I was asked as part of this presentation whether there were any interesting facts or findings that came up while researching that did not make it into my essay. And there were a number of these, but I'd like to mention one briefly in closing. And this has nothing to do with religion at all, in fact, which is why it's not in the essay. But it has to do with material culture. And because I work in a library and a museum, I'm very interested in material culture and how it comes up. And in De La Motta's published response to Cerneau, De La Motta includes his own reports of visiting New York Governor DeWitt Clinton, who was an officer in Cerneau's Supreme Council, and also visiting Joseph Cerneau himself. And he includes a report of what was transacted during these visits. And in these visits, he was trying to ascertain where Cerneau's Masonic authority came from. So in September of 1813, De La Motta, along with 4 members of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction's first Supreme Council, and that was Richard Riker, Samson Simpson, Moses Levi Maduro Pexoto, and J.J. Gorgas, called on Cerneau at his residence in New York City. And it's important to note that Cerneau made his living as a jeweler. And De La Motta makes some interesting insinuations of his own when describing how Cerneau reacted to being shown a Scottish Rite ring. And I have this brief quote that I'm going to close with. So De La Motta wrote, that in the presence of the aforesaid most illustrious and puissant brethren, meaning the four members of the Supreme Council that were with him visiting Cerneau, I did ascertain the positive fact that the said Joseph Cerneau was not of the 33rd degree, nor did he even appear to me to possess any knowledge of that degree whatever, or of a certain finger ring which was shown to him, with which he went to the window and returned without comment or ceremony, but not until he had taken care to examine it with a great deal of attention. And I like this sort of novelistic touch of Joseph Cerneau going over to the window to get some good light, taking a close look at this ring. The insinuation, of course, being that Cerneau was looking at this ring because he was very much interested in copying it for his own purposes. So that is all I have. I encourage you all to buy the book, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Brother Jeff. We do have a few Q&As, and I just want to remind all the attendees that at the bottom or somewhere around your screen, you should see a Q&A button. We will be fielding Q&A questions for each of the speakers that we bring up this evening. So the first one here, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind answering, would you say that other Supreme Councils which maintain a Trinitarian Christian membership are intentionally being exclusive, or simply practicing what they believe as a requirement of the rite in its oldest form?
What a great question. I am not even going to try to answer that question. I think what's interesting about this question, I'll answer this slightly differently. I actually don't have a particular opinion about it, but I do think what's interesting is groups by their nature, fraternal groups by their nature, I would say, rely on exclusion. You can't have a group without excluding some people and allowing some people in. And so I think the question of who's being included, who's not being included, and why they're being included or excluded is a very interesting question for historians to look at.
And question number two, in your research, did you find that the rituals between the three Supreme Councils were fairly similar, or were they vastly different?
So that's an interesting question. So there are some historical ritual materials which are still in existence today that help answer this question. This was a big question I had myself. Of course, if you look at the sort of great precursor to Scottish Rite, English language Scottish Rite ritual, you have the Franken manuscripts. And very explicitly in the Franken manuscripts, there is an obligation for Jewish members to take. There's a very specially written cover obligation for a number of the degrees. So it was clear that this was something that was kept in mind then. There's also an existing 33rd degree ritual that was from the Charleston Supreme Council, which also includes a alternate obligation for Jewish members. And then there was if I remember correctly, it was a Rose Croix ritual that was related to related to a group that was subordinate to Cerneau's group, which seemed to have language that was explicit in the degree being for Christians only. So I would say I'm far from any sort of person who could say with any expertise how similar or different these rituals are. But within the context of my paper, I did look at the rituals from this time period and right before to look for language that might specifically call out whether certain people were included or not.
And one last question that we have coming in, this is on the same lines. Did you find that other characters like Cerneau around that same time were trying to set up more spurious rites during this time in America?
That's not a question I particularly looked into. And I would also say, I think words like spurious and clandestine are very obviously subjective and contextual. And I think that one thing that's interesting, and I'll sort of close on this, one thing that's interesting about all of the Cerneau groups is they lasted for a long time. They actually lasted into the 20th century. And I think it's clear that they were very successful, and that the people that were involved in them did not think that they were practicing anything except a legitimate form of Freemasonry. And I think the northern Masonic jurisdiction, the southern jurisdiction, wouldn't have spent so much time and energy and spilled so much ink fighting against them if they didn't have strong feelings about how not only were they did they not see them as legitimate, but also success. They saw them as successful, and I think they saw them as perhaps siphoning off members from Blue Lodges. So,
well, thank you so much, Brother Jeff, for presenting this morning or this evening, and also fielding a few Q&As.